time together in this short series of videos, I invite you to explore with me the ways that communities of transactors from the 11th century to the present, from rubber traders in Malaysia to diamond dealers in New York, have succeeded in using non-legal, reputation-based sanctions to support exchange, and to support it largely or entirely outside of the public legal system. In the lingo of the literature, the mechanisms by which traders in these markets succeed in doing this come under the umbrella term of private ordering. Although sociologists and anthropologists have long been interested in private ordering, the legal and institutional economics literature on private ordering in exchange relationships really didn't come into full focus and blossom until the 1980s. Taking its cues from a series of case studies that explored the way that trade could flourish with little or no support from any public legal system, the literature came to a consensus. The consensus was that private ordering of exchange relationships was likely to succeed, but under a very limited and particular set of conditions. What were these conditions? Well, they were that the exchanges took place within small, geographically concentrated, socially or ethnically homogeneous groups. Groups whose members dealt with one another on a repeat basis over a long period of time. These same preconditions were also drawn on by famous scholars like Robert Ellickson in his path-breaking book, Order Without Law, to explain other types of private ordering, such as relations between farmers and ranchers in Shasta County, California. But our focus here is on the private ordering of exchange. So I think it's most useful to begin by identifying some of the most widely cited studies that led many scholars and policymakers to focus on these preconditions. These are studies by Janet Tai Landa, Avner Greif, and Lisa Bernstein. So let's turn first to Landa. Janet Landa's seminal study, A Theory of Ethnically Homogeneous Middleman Groups, was published in the Journal of Legal Studies. It explored in quite a bit of detail, based on field work that she did, the role played by kinship groups, ethnic ties, personalized exchange relationships, and traders' very deep and abiding commitments to Confucian ethics in supporting purely extra-legal exchange among ethnically Chinese Hokkien middleman merchants operating in Malaysia's rubber markets in the 1960s. Perhaps the most famous case study of private ordering can be found in Avner Greif's papers on exchange relationships among the Maghrebi Jewish traders who in the 11th century engaged in long-distance trade in a variety of goods across the Islamic Mediterranean. Although some Maghrebi were traveling traders, many engaged one another as agents to act on their behalf, long-distance agents who they trusted not to cheat. Trusted even though there was no legal infrastructure to step in if an agent defected. Greif posited that the Maghrebi were able to do this by using a private order institution that he described as, quote, a non-anonymous organizational framework through which agency relations were established only among those with a specific identity, an institution that he modeled as a coalition. The coalition was composed solely of Maghrebi Jews, that is, Jews who migrated from Baghdad and fanned out across the Islamic Mediterranean. The Maghrebi were a closed group with frequent and plentiful ties to one another. They had a collectivist identity that set them apart in business dealings from the other Jews with whom they lived and prayed, typically in small, quite tightly knit communities. As Greif put it, quote, the Maghrebi's social identity provided the means to coordinate expectations required for the functioning of the coalition. Coalition members had a common belief that opportunistic behavior was likely to be detected, and as a group, they were firmly committed to a norm of not dealing with a cheating member. And not cheating with a member who himself dealt with cheaters. In Greif's model of the coalition, each merchant feared the damage that exclusion from the coalition would do to their future income. So not cheating, or if you prefer, cooperation, emerged as an equilibrium, an outcome that Greif considered consistent with the extant historical evidence. In a similar vein, and taking inspiration from both Greif and Landa, Lisa Bernstein explored the ways that the Orthodox Jewish diamond merchants in the New York Diamond Dealers Club in the late 1980s organized themselves in a way that made them able to support exchanges. Exchanges that often involved a promise to deliver a particular diamond, a valuable diamond, in exchange for a future payment, and to do so based only on a handshake and intonation of the words Mazalu Bracha, translated roughly as luck and blessings. These transactions could not be enforced in the state legal system, forcing traders to rely solely on the social ties among them and the club's power of exclusion to support exchange. Although these and other studies succeeded in establishing the potential power of private ordering, in retrospect, the emphasis that they placed, and to an even greater extent their subsequent readers placed, on the role that social and ethnic homogeneity, repeat dealing, and relative geographic concentration in small groups played in making private orders successful, had a very unfortunate effect. What was that unfortunate effect? Well, it created the perception that these preconditions were necessary for private ordering to succeed. This in turn led academics and policymakers to have an unduly narrow view of when private order institutions could effectively bond exchange, and an unduly narrow view of the types of reforms that might improve the security of exchange, particularly in emerging and developing economies. In this series of videos, one of my goals is to correct this misperception and to suggest that the success of these private order systems and the preconditions that are needed for them to flourish can be more usefully understood through the lens of a branch of economic sociology known as social network analysis. Applying a social network analysis frame to studies of ethnically homogeneous trade leads to what I consider a very happy conclusion. It suggests that private ordering may in fact be possible in a much wider set of circumstances than these case studies have been interpreted to suggest. More generally, it reveals that the case studies of ethnically based trade are merely special cases of a much more general phenomenon that can affect the security of exchange in a wide variety of markets. So let's take a brief look at the core building blocks of the network approach. The network approach posits that where the connections between individual traders, groups of traders, or market institutions of various types are such that information about bad commercial behavior is unlikely to escape notice and is very likely to be quickly transmitted to or obtainable by the relevant market participants. And when that information is of a type that will actually be taken into account by most traders in deciding who to deal with and on what terms to deal with them, then these non-legal sanctions, which we can call in this context network governance, are going to be able to support exchange and discourage opportunistic behavior. Now, this conclusion follows regardless of the source of ties among traders. Social or ethnic ties are but one type of information conduit, a type that has wonderful properties in that it might be nearly free to use, and it might have the advantage of being able to augment business sanctions with social sanctions, or enable a group to overcome collective action problems and create trading rules and other dispute resolution tribunals, other types of ties can in fact work just as well. This is true even if these ties arise from a wine drinking club, a bowling league, a trade association, a supplier association, or even just a pattern of past transactions among members of a market. As long as these ties are among the right people and are strong enough to transmit the relevant information, network governance has the potential to be a very effective way of supporting exchange. To sum up, from the network perspective, what's really going on in trade in the markets studied by Landa, Greif, and Bernstein is not ethnicity per se. Rather, it's the network structure of the relevant ties between and among individual traders, trading centers, and in some instances, market institutions that provide the support needed for trade to flourish. In the next video, we will take a step back and revisit the work of Landa, Greif, and Bernstein through a network lens. In our final video, we will very briefly explore the power and potential of using network governance to support or strengthen security of exchange in non-ethnically homogeneous settings.